Something unexpected happened inside Team USA's training camp, and the reaction from veteran players said everything. At first, it looked like just another routine drill. Cameras were rolling, players were laughing, and the atmosphere inside the gym felt relaxed. Some of the biggest names in women's basketball were on the court together, preparing for international competition. The best of the best. Olympic champions, league MVPs, players who had spent years dominating the professional game. But then Caitlin Clark stepped into the play. And what happened next instantly changed the energy in the entire gym. It was the kind of moment that spreads across the basketball world in minutes. Players yelling, teammates jumping off the bench, coaches turning their heads in disbelief, and veterans, players who had seen everything the sport could throw at them, suddenly looking at each other like they had just witnessed something they weren't fully prepared for. Because this wasn't supposed to happen yet. Caitlin Clark had just entered the professional stage. She was still adapting to the speed, the physicality, and the expectations that come with playing against the best players in the world. Most rookies spend months, sometimes years, trying to prove they belong in a room like this. But inside that Team USA gym, it looked like Clark skipped that entire process. The footage from practice started circulating almost immediately. Fans began dissecting every detail. Analysts started replaying the moment again and again. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people called it a glimpse of the future. Others said it was proof that the game was already changing. But the most interesting reactions didn't come from fans online. They came from the players who were actually standing on the court when it happened. Because when Caitlin Clark pulled off that moment during practice, something became very clear to everyone watching. This rookie wasn't just adjusting to the level of competition. She was already comfortable controlling it. And if that sounds unbelievable, the details of what actually happened inside that gym make it even more shocking. Because that play wasn't just impressive. It revealed something much bigger about Caitlin Clark's place in the sport right now. And it all started with a simple drill that suddenly turned into one of the most talked about practice moments of the year. But to understand why everyone reacted the way they did, you have to look closely at what unfolded during that Team USA practice session. Because the moment Clark stepped into the play, the entire gym realized something at the exact same time. This wasn't normal. Not even close. And what happened next would leave even some of the most experienced players in the world shaking their heads. Team USA training camp is usually a controlled environment. Practices are intense, competitive, and highly organized. Coaches run drills designed to sharpen chemistry between players who normally spend the season competing against each other in professional leagues. The goal is simple: build a team that can dominate on the international stage. But even in a room filled with elite athletes, there are still moments when something unexpected happens. And during one of the early Team USA practice sessions, that exact moment arrived. Players were running a fast-paced drill designed to simulate late-game situations. The kind of drill where the defense is aggressive, the pace is high, and every possession matters. Coaches wanted to see which players could handle pressure, make quick decisions, and create offense when the clock was running down. Veteran stars were moving the ball around the perimeter. Quick passes, sharp cuts, defenders trying to disrupt every movement. Then the ball ended up in Caitlin Clark's hands. At that moment, the defense closed in immediately. This wasn't college basketball anymore. These were experienced professionals who had spent years studying offensive players. They knew Clark's reputation. They knew about the deep shooting range, the quick release, and the fearless confidence. So they pressed her. Hard. Most rookies in that situation would try to move the ball. Maybe pass to a veteran teammate. Maybe reset the offense and let someone else take control. But Clark didn't hesitate. She took one dribble, shifted her weight, and suddenly created just enough space. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Clark launched a deep shot, far beyond where most players even consider shooting during a practice drill. For a split second, the entire gym went quiet. Players watched the ball arc through the air. Then it dropped straight through the net. Game winner. The reaction was immediate. Teammates shouted. Some players started laughing in disbelief. A few veterans just stood there shaking their heads. Because that wasn't just a lucky shot. It was the kind of shot that only happens when a player has absolute confidence in their ability to deliver under pressure. And the craziest part? Clark didn't celebrate. She simply jogged back down the court like it was the most normal thing in the world. That reaction alone told everyone in the gym something important. She expected it to go in. Moments like that are rare in practice environments, even at the highest level. Coaches design drills to simulate game situations, but when a play like that unfolds naturally, it changes the mood instantly. The competitive energy inside the gym started rising. Players began challenging each other more aggressively. Trash talk started echoing across the court. And suddenly, the practice felt less like preparation and more like a real game. But what stood out most wasn't just the shot itself. It was how naturally Clark seemed to operate in that environment. For someone who had only recently entered the professional stage, she looked completely comfortable competing against players who had spent years building their reputations in the league. And the more the practice continued, the more noticeable that confidence became. Clark kept pushing the pace. She moved the ball quickly. She created scoring opportunities. She made passes that forced defenders to react a split second too late. And every time she touched the ball, the gym seemed to lean forward just a little bit more. Because players were starting to realize something. This wasn't just a talented rookie having a good day. This was someone who played with the same fearless creativity that made her one of the most talked-about athletes in basketball before she even stepped into the professional spotlight. But that practice moment, the deep shot that stunned the gym, was only the beginning. Because once players started seeing how Clark operated inside that environment, another realization began to spread across the court. Her style of play wasn't just exciting. It was contagious. And the atmosphere inside that Team USA camp started to change because of it. But the real surprise came from something else entirely. Because while that shot was impressive, what happened during the rest of practice may have been even more revealing. And it showed exactly why so many people around the basketball world are starting to believe Caitlin Clark isn't just another rising star. She might be the player who changes the entire direction of the sport. But the deeper story inside that gym wasn't just the shot. It was the atmosphere surrounding it. Team USA training camps are usually intense. These are not casual practices. The players selected for these camps represent the very top tier of the sport. Olympic gold medalists, league champions, MVP candidates. Every possession is competitive, every drill is serious, and every player is fighting to prove they belong on the international stage. But something about this particular camp felt different. Observers watching the practice noticed something unusual almost immediately. Instead of the usual rigid tension that often surrounds elite training environments, there was an unusual level of energy flowing through the gym. Players were laughing. Teammates were yelling encouragement from the sidelines. Veterans were joking with younger players during water breaks. And right in the middle of that environment was Caitlin Clark. For someone who had only recently stepped into the professional spotlight, Clark didn't look like an outsider trying to fit in. She looked like someone who had already been part of the group for years. One of the most noticeable things was the pace she played with. When Clark had the ball, the tempo of the entire drill seemed to accelerate. Passes came quicker. Players started cutting harder. Defenders suddenly had to react faster than they expected. It's something coaches often talk about when describing great playmakers. Some players simply run the offense, but others change the rhythm of the entire game. Clark belongs in that second category. During one sequence, the ball moved rapidly around the perimeter before ending up in Clark's hands near the top of the arc. Instead of slowing down to reset the play, she immediately fired a no-look pass toward a teammate cutting to the basket. The timing was perfect. The defense didn't even realize the pass had been made until the ball was already finishing at the rim. Teammates erupted. Okay, someone shouted from the sideline. Moments like that started stacking up throughout the practice. Another possession, another quick decision, another creative pass. And every time something unexpected happened, the reaction inside the gym became louder. That's one of the things people don't always understand about elite basketball environments. Great players recognize greatness immediately. They don't need months of statistics or media coverage to evaluate someone's ability. They can see it within minutes. And as practice continued, many of the veterans inside that gym began to see something in Clark's game that they couldn't ignore. Fearlessness. It didn't matter who was guarding her. It didn't matter how physical the defense became. Clark played with the same bold style that made her one of the most electrifying players in college basketball. But there was something else happening beneath the surface. The chemistry inside the gym started evolving. Players who normally compete against each other during the WNBA season were suddenly feeding off each other's energy. Fast breaks became more explosive. Passing sequences became more creative. Players started celebrating big plays with genuine excitement. It looked less like a structured training session, and more like a group of elite competitors simply enjoying the game at the highest level. That energy matters more than most people realize. Basketball is a sport that thrives on momentum. When players are enjoying the flow of the game, the entire team becomes more dangerous. And Clark's presence seemed to amplify that effect. Her style of play encourages movement. It encourages quick decision-making. It encourages risk-taking. In other words, it encourages the exact type of basketball that fans love to watch. But while the players inside the gym were reacting to her skill in real time, something much bigger was unfolding outside those walls. Because the buzz surrounding Caitlin Clark had already started spreading far beyond Team USA practice. Fans weren't just paying attention to the clips from that gym. They were paying attention to everything surrounding her rise in the sport. And when you zoom out to look at the bigger picture, the story becomes even more incredible. Because what Caitlin Clark has done to the popularity of women's basketball in such a short period of time is something the sport has never seen before. And that's where the Real story begins. Long before she stepped into that Team USA gym, Caitlin Clark was already changing the trajectory of women's basketball. It started during her college career. When Clark arrived at the University of Iowa, she quickly became one of the most electrifying players in the country. Her style of play didn't just stand out, it demanded attention. Deep three-pointers, creative passes, fearless drives to the basket, and a competitive fire that made every game feel like a must-watch event. But what truly separated Clark from other star players was her ability to connect with fans. Her games didn't just attract basketball enthusiasts. They attracted casual sports viewers who suddenly found themselves fascinated by the way she played. People who had never followed women's college basketball before were suddenly tuning in. And as her career progressed, the numbers began to reflect that growing interest. Television ratings started climbing. Arena attendance skyrocketed. Highlight clips spread across social media faster than almost anything else in the sport. By the time Clark entered her final college season, the excitement surrounding her had reached another level entirely. Every game felt like an event. Opposing arenas sold out weeks in advance just to watch her play. Students camped outside stadiums hoping to secure tickets. And millions of viewers tuned in whenever she stepped onto the court. Then came the records. Clark shattered scoring milestones that had stood for decades. She broke the NCAA all-time scoring record, surpassing legends who had defined the sport for generations. But even that achievement only told part of the story. Because the real impact of Caitlin Clark wasn't just statistical. It was cultural. Suddenly, women's basketball was dominating sports conversations in ways it hadn't before. Talk shows debated her performances. Sports analysts broke down her highlights. Fans across the country argued about whether she was the most exciting player the sport had ever seen. And as her popularity grew, the business side of basketball began paying close attention. Major brands started lining up. Endorsement deals followed. Companies recognized that Clark wasn't just a talented athlete. She was a magnet for attention. And attention drives everything in professional sports. Sponsors want players who bring visibility. Television networks want games that attract viewers. Leagues want athletes who expand the audience. Caitlin Clark was doing all three simultaneously. When she entered the professional ranks, the impact became even more obvious. Ticket demand for games featuring Clark surged almost immediately. Some arenas reported their highest attendance numbers in years. Television ratings spiked whenever her team appeared on national broadcasts. Social media engagement exploded every time she made a highlight play. It was as if the entire basketball world suddenly had a new center of gravity. And whether people loved the attention or questioned it, one thing became impossible to deny. Caitlin Clark had become the biggest draw in the sport. But whenever a new star rises that quickly, it creates complicated reactions throughout the league. Some players celebrate the growth. Others begin to wonder how it will affect the balance of attention inside the sport. Because when one athlete suddenly becomes the face of an entire movement, the spotlight inevitably shifts. And as the excitement surrounding Clark continued to grow, the basketball world started noticing something else happening behind the scenes. A quiet tension. A shift in the conversation about the future of the league. And that tension would soon become impossible to ignore. Because the rise of Caitlin Clark wasn't just bringing millions of new fans to the sport. It was also forcing everyone, from veteran players to league executives, to confront a new reality about where women's basketball might be heading next. And that realization would soon spark one of the most fascinating power shifts the sport has ever seen. As Caitlin Clark's influence continued growing, something else began happening across the basketball world. The spotlight was shifting. For years, the WNBA had built its identity around a group of veteran stars who carried the league through its early decades. These players established the culture of the game, built rivalries, and helped develop the foundation that allowed women's professional basketball to survive. They were respected, they were accomplished, and many of them had spent their entire careers fighting for recognition. But when Caitlin Clark arrived, the level of attention surrounding the sport changed almost instantly. Suddenly, the conversation around women's basketball wasn't just about the league anymore. It was about Clark. Sports shows debated her performances. News outlets covered her games. Millions of new fans started watching the league for the first time. And that kind of sudden spotlight shift can create complicated emotions inside any professional sport. Because when a new star rises quickly, the balance of attention inevitably changes. Veteran players who had spent years building their reputations now found themselves sharing the stage with a rookie whose popularity seemed to explode overnight. Some players welcomed the attention. Many understood that Clark's presence was bringing unprecedented visibility to the sport. But others quietly questioned how the media narrative was evolving. Analysts began discussing Clark as the future of women's basketball. Fans flooded arenas whenever she was scheduled to play. Opposing teams suddenly experienced record attendance when Clark's team came to town, and the difference in attention was impossible to ignore. Inside games, that tension sometimes became visible. Clark faced aggressive defenses from the moment she stepped onto professional courts. Opponents pressed her full court. Defenders challenged every shot. Physical play increased whenever she had the ball. Some people interpreted this as the natural adjustment period every rookie experiences. Others saw it as the league responding to the enormous spotlight surrounding her. But Clark's response to that pressure remained remarkably consistent. She kept playing her game. She kept taking deep shots. She kept creating highlight moments. And every time she delivered another unforgettable play, the conversation around her impact only grew louder. But while the debates around her popularity continued among fans and analysts, something even bigger was unfolding behind the scenes. Because professional sports are not just about competition on the court. They're also about business. And the business side of basketball had started paying very close attention to what Caitlin Clark was doing to the sport. Because when one player begins drawing millions of new viewers to a league, that player's influence extends far beyond the scoreboard. It starts affecting the entire financial ecosystem surrounding the game. And that's where the real power shift began. In professional sports, popularity isn't just measured in points or championships. It's measured in attention. Attention drives ticket sales. Attention drives television ratings. And attention drives the enormous business partnerships that keep leagues operating. When Caitlin Clark entered the professional stage, the surge of attention surrounding her became impossible for the sports industry to ignore. Almost immediately, arenas hosting her games began seeing dramatic increases in attendance. Fans who had never attended a WNBA game before suddenly wanted to see Clark play in person. Some venues moved games to larger arenas to accommodate the demand. Ticket prices climbed. Games sold out. And crowds started showing up hours early just to watch warm-ups. But the impact wasn't limited to the arenas. Television networks noticed something even more significant. Games featuring Clark consistently produced higher ratings than typical broadcasts. Viewership numbers surged. Clips of her highlights spread across social media platforms at astonishing speeds. Suddenly, women's basketball wasn't just gaining fans. It was gaining mainstream sports attention. And that type of momentum creates enormous opportunities for brands and sponsors. Major companies began aligning themselves with Clark's growing popularity. Endorsement deals followed. Marketing campaigns appeared. Clark became one of the most recognizable faces in the sport almost immediately after turning professional. For sponsors, the reasoning was simple. Athletes who attract massive audiences represent enormous marketing potential. And Clark was attracting an audience that extended far beyond traditional basketball fans. Young viewers were discovering the sport through her. Casual sports fans who normally followed other leagues were tuning in to watch her games. Even international audiences started paying closer attention to women's basketball. That kind of crossover appeal is incredibly rare in professional sports. It's the type of influence that can transform an entire league's trajectory. League executives and team owners began recognizing the scale of what was happening. Every time Clark played, interest in the sport seemed to grow. Merchandise sales increased. Social media engagement surged. And discussions about the future of women's basketball became louder than ever. But whenever the business side of sports begins evolving rapidly, it naturally leads to bigger conversations. Questions about the future of the league. Questions about how revenue should grow alongside popularity. Questions about how the next generation of stars will shape the direction of the game. And Caitlin Clark's arrival had accelerated all of those conversations at once. Because the attention she was bringing to women's basketball wasn't temporary. It was building momentum. And everyone across the sport, from players to executives, was beginning to realize that the league might be entering an entirely new era. But while all of those discussions continued behind the scenes, something else was happening on the court. Caitlin Clark kept doing exactly what made fans fall in love with her game in the first place. She kept delivering moments. And those moments were slowly reshaping how the basketball world viewed the future of the sport. Which brings us back to that practice inside the Team USA gym. Because what happened there wasn't just a highlight. It was a glimpse of where women's basketball might be heading next. And for many people watching closely, that realization was both exciting and a little bit shocking. As Caitlin Clark's presence continued reshaping the conversation around women's basketball, one reality slowly became impossible to ignore. The sport was entering a new phase. For decades, the WNBA had fought for recognition in a crowded sports landscape. The league survived difficult financial periods, fought for television exposure, and relied heavily on the dedication of players who believed in the future of the game. Progress came slowly. But suddenly, the momentum surrounding women's basketball began accelerating faster than anyone expected. And much of that acceleration traced back to one player, Caitlin Clark. When new fans started tuning in by the millions, the ripple effect touched nearly every corner of the league. Television networks began increasing coverage. Sports analysts started dedicating entire segments to women's basketball. Arena attendance numbers began rising across multiple teams. For the first time in years, the league felt like it was standing at the edge of a major breakthrough moment. But moments like that also force leagues to confront complicated questions. How should the sport grow from here? What role should star players play in shaping the league's future? And perhaps the biggest question of all, who will lead the next era of women's basketball? Historically, every major sports league has experienced moments when a single player helped transform its popularity. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird helped revive the NBA in the 1980s. Michael Jordan turned basketball into a global phenomenon during the 1990s. Later, players like LeBron James carried that global influence into a new generation. The pattern is familiar. A generational talent arrives. Fans become fascinated. The league evolves. Now, many observers believe women's basketball may be experiencing a similar turning point. And Caitlin Clark sits right at the center of that shift. But what makes Clark's situation unique is the timing. She entered the professional stage during a moment when the sports world was already changing. Social media had transformed how fans interact with athletes. Highlight clips could spread across the internet within seconds. A single spectacular play could reach millions of viewers overnight. Clark's style of basketball fits perfectly into that environment. Her deep three-pointers look incredible on highlight reels. Her no-look passes create instant viral moments. And her fearless confidence gives fans something they love to talk about. That combination has created a powerful cycle. Clark produces exciting moments. Those moments spread rapidly online. New fans discover the sport, and the audience continues growing. League executives understand how valuable that cycle can become, because sustained attention is the engine that drives professional sports. More viewers lead to larger television contracts. Larger television contracts lead to greater financial stability. Greater financial stability opens the door for expansion, development programs, and global exposure. In other words, the ripple effects extend far beyond a single player. But every movement needs a catalyst. And many people around the basketball world believe Caitlin Clark has become exactly that. Yet even as those conversations continue, Clark herself has remained focused on something much simpler: playing basketball. Which brings the story right back to that Team USA training camp. Because while the business world debates the future of the sport, Clark keeps delivering moments that remind everyone why they started watching in the first place. And the moment that happened inside that practice gym may end up symbolizing something much bigger than anyone realized at the time. When people first saw the clip from Team USA practice, many assumed it was simply another highlight. A deep shot, a loud reaction, a fun moment between teammates. But when analysts and fans looked closer, the significance became clearer. That moment represented something symbolic. For years, Team USA has served as the ultimate proving ground in women's basketball. The players selected for those camps represent the highest level of talent in the sport. Earning a spot on that roster means joining a legacy that includes some of the greatest athletes in basketball history. And stepping into that environment can be intimidating. But Caitlin Clark didn't look intimidated. She looked comfortable. She looked confident. She looked like she belonged. That matters more than people might realize. Because confidence at that level spreads quickly through a team environment. When players see someone competing fearlessly, it raises the competitive energy for everyone around them. And throughout that Team USA practice, that energy was everywhere. Players were talking more. They were pushing each other harder. They were celebrating big plays with genuine excitement. It felt less like a group of athletes cautiously learning to play together, and more like a group of elite competitors realizing they might be building something special. Clark's deep shot during the drill became the highlight moment that everyone remembered. But the real story was what happened afterward. The pace of practice increased. Players began challenging each other more aggressively. Coaches watched closely as the competitive atmosphere intensified. Moments like that often reveal something important about a player. They show whether someone thrives when surrounded by greatness. And during that practice session, Caitlin Clark looked like someone who feeds off that environment. Not intimidated by it, not overwhelmed by it, but energized by it. That realization may have surprised some people watching from outside the gym. But inside that practice facility, many of the players already understood what they were witnessing. A new generation of talent stepping into the spotlight. And if that practice moment is any indication, the next chapter of women's basketball might be arriving faster than anyone expected. Because when a player with Clark's confidence, creativity, and competitive fire steps onto the international stage, the possibilities become enormous. What happened inside that Team USA gym didn't stay inside that gym for very long. Within hours, clips from the practice began circulating online. Fans started sharing the footage. Analysts replayed the sequence again and again. And suddenly, a moment that originally took place in a closed training environment was being watched by millions of people around the basketball world. But the reactions weren't just about the shot. They were about what that moment seemed to represent. Because when people saw Caitlin Clark confidently launching that deep shot during a drill surrounded by some of the greatest players in the world, it reinforced something many fans had already begun to believe. She wasn't just another talented rookie. She was becoming the centerpiece of the next era of the sport. Social media exploded with discussion. Some fans celebrated the moment as proof that Clark belonged among the very best players in the game. Others debated whether her fearless style would translate consistently to the international stage. And of course, analysts across sports media started dissecting every detail. They talked about her shooting range. They talked about her playmaking vision. They talked about the way her presence seemed to energize the entire gym. But the most interesting reactions came from people who had been watching the development of women's basketball for decades, because they recognized something familiar. Moments like this, moments where a young star announces their presence without hesitation, have appeared before in sports history. When Magic Johnson first stepped into the NBA Finals as a rookie and delivered one of the greatest performances the league had ever seen, people immediately sensed a shift. When Michael Jordan began taking over games with impossible shots and relentless competitiveness, fans realized they were witnessing the rise of something special. When players like LeBron James arrived with unprecedented hype and then quickly proved they could meet those expectations, the entire league began adjusting around them. Those players didn't just succeed individually. They transformed the environment around them. Now, many observers believe Caitlin Clark might be following a similar path within women's basketball. Of course, comparisons to legendary athletes can be complicated. Every era of sports brings its own challenges and its own stars. But what makes Clark's rise particularly fascinating is the way it aligns with a larger moment for the sport itself. Women's basketball has been building momentum for years. Youth participation has increased. College programs have grown stronger. International competition has become more intense. But the sport has often searched for a single moment, or a single player, that could push it fully into the mainstream spotlight. And Clark's rise seems to be arriving at exactly the right time. Her style of play captures attention instantly. Her personality connects with fans. Her performances create moments people want to talk about long after the game ends. That combination is incredibly powerful, because sports thrive on moments. The moments that fans replay. The moments that become part of highlight compilations. The moments that younger players watch and imagine themselves recreating someday. And that Team USA practice shot felt like one of those moments. Not because it was the most difficult shot ever made. Not because it happened during a championship game. But because of the setting. Because of the confidence. Because of the way everyone in the gym reacted. It was a glimpse of something bigger. A small preview of what might happen when Clark fully settles into the international stage alongside the best players in the world. And when fans began realizing that possibility, the excitement around women's basketball started reaching another level. Because if a practice moment could generate this much attention, imagine what might happen when those same players step onto the court in front of a global audience. Imagine the atmosphere when Team USA competes for major international titles. Imagine the energy when millions of viewers tune in to watch one of the most exciting young players in the sport perform on the biggest stage available. That's the potential people are beginning to see. Not just a single highlight, but the beginning of a much larger story. A story about the growth of women's basketball. A story about a new generation of athletes stepping into leadership roles. And a story about how one player's fearless style might help carry the sport into its next chapter. Because if that Team USA practice moment taught fans anything, it's this. The spotlight surrounding Caitlin Clark isn't fading anytime soon. If anything, it's only getting brighter. And the world is watching to see what she does next. But with all of this attention comes something else that every superstar eventually has to face. Pressure. The kind of pressure that follows athletes the moment they become the center of the sports world. And right now, Caitlin Clark is experiencing something very few players in women's basketball history have faced at such an early stage of their careers. Expectation. Not just the expectation to play well, but the expectation to transform an entire sport. That's a heavy responsibility for any athlete, no matter how talented they are. Fans expect highlight moments every game. Analysts expect leadership. Sponsors expect visibility. And critics are always waiting for the first sign of struggle. Every superstar in sports history has gone through this phase. When Michael Jordan first entered the NBA, the attention surrounding him grew so quickly that every performance was analyzed under a microscope. When LeBron James entered the league straight out of high school, he carried expectations so enormous that people debated his legacy before he even played his first professional game. Those types of expectations can overwhelm some athletes. But for others, they become fuel. And so far, Caitlin Clark has shown signs that she belongs in that second category. Throughout her career, she has never seemed intimidated by the spotlight. If anything, she appears to thrive when the pressure increases. Big games. National television broadcasts. Packed arenas filled with fans eager to see what she'll do next. Those environments seem to bring out the most creative and fearless parts of her game. But the professional level presents a new challenge. Because in the WNBA and international competitions, every opponent studies the same highlight clips that fans love watching. Defenders prepare specifically to stop her deep shooting range. Coaches design defensive schemes aimed at limiting her playmaking ability. Teams know that slowing Clark down can change the entire flow of a game. And yet, despite all of that preparation, she continues finding ways to make something happen. Sometimes it's a deep three-pointer that silences the crowd. Sometimes it's a pass that nobody expected. Sometimes it's a play that completely shifts the momentum of the game. That unpredictability is one of the reasons fans are so fascinated by her. Because when Clark has the ball, anything can happen. And that unpredictability is exactly what makes players like her so valuable to the sport. Fans don't just watch to see if she'll score. They watch to see what she'll do next. But the journey from rising star to legendary athlete is never simple. Every superstar eventually faces moments of adversity. Injuries, tough losses, criticism, slumps that test confidence. Those moments are part of every great career. And the way an athlete responds to them often determines how their story is remembered. Right now, Caitlin Clark is still in the early chapters of her professional journey. The excitement surrounding her is enormous. The opportunities ahead are massive. But the real test of greatness always comes over time. Can she continue evolving her game? Can she handle the physical demands of professional competition year after year? Can she lead teams through the challenges that come with championship expectations? Those questions will shape the next stage of her career. But if the early signs are any indication, Clark appears ready for the challenge. Because the same confidence that allowed her to launch that deep shot in the Team USA practice gym, the same creativity that made her a record-breaking college superstar, and the same fearless energy that has drawn millions of fans to the sport, those qualities are still very much part of her game. And if she continues developing the way many experts expect, the next few years could become one of the most exciting periods in the history of women's basketball. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is something that hasn't happened yet, because the biggest moments of Caitlin Clark's career may still be waiting just around the corner. And when those moments arrive, the entire basketball world will be watching. Looking back at that Team USA practice moment now, it feels like more than just a highlight. It feels like a preview of what might be coming next for women's basketball. Caitlin Clark's journey from college superstar to professional phenomenon has already changed the way many people view the sport. Millions of new fans have discovered women's basketball through her performances. Arena crowds have grown louder. Television audiences have expanded. And conversations about the future of the game have become bigger than ever. But perhaps the most exciting part of this story is that Clark's professional career is only just beginning. She's still adapting to the speed of the pro game, still building chemistry with teammates, still learning how to navigate the pressures that come with being one of the most recognizable athletes in the sport. And yet she's already producing moments that capture the attention of the entire basketball world. That practice shot inside the Team USA gym may seem small in the grand scheme of things, but sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. They show how players respond when surrounded by the best competition. They show who thrives under pressure. And they show who might be ready to lead the next era of the sport. If Caitlin Clark continues playing the way she has so far, the future of women's basketball could look very different in just a few years. More fans, more attention, more unforgettable moments. And if that future really is beginning to take shape right now, it means we're witnessing something special as it happens. But now I want to hear what you think. Do you believe Caitlin Clark is already changing the direction of women's basketball? Do you think moments like that Team USA practice shot show she's ready to dominate the international stage? Or do you think the real impact of her career is still ahead of us? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that dive deep into the biggest moments, rivalries, and power shifts in the world of basketball, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this story might be even bigger than the last, and you won't want to miss what happens next.